There are varying degrees of consciousness. For example, say someone who is a runner competes in the mile run. You would consider that person very foolish if they thought that their times, when they recorded their times for the mile, were irrelevant and had nothing to do with their ability to compete and to conquer the opposition. But you would consider a martial artist even more foolish or even more incompetent if he thought that their ability to spar and win had nothing to do with their ability to apply martial arts principle in combat. Except for the martial artist is supposed to be more insightful than the runner. So therefore, his level of incompetence is greater. That is why you would consider him more competent, for those of you who are wondering. That's the exception. Now, it is the same with wisdom. There are general rules, and then there are exceptions to the rules that either compound or make the scale exponentially worse or better. And it is the same with the mgtow movement. They talk about red and blue pill and whatnot. And they say, are you a blue pill mgtow? Your level of being awake. The more awake you are, the less you want to do with women. Well, the problem with this general mgtow thing is that it does not incorporate my superior philosophy. On the highest level of being aware of how the contemporary adult female is to be not only utterly disgusted with them, but to truly understand why. These levels of consciousness can be compared to walking off a cliff. When you're aware that's a cliff, you simply don't walk off. So when people become aware, or should I say, if people become aware to the degree that I have become aware, it leads to a life of poverty and isolation. Mental health, which consists of know-nothings, they get paid and historically use their positions for the political abuse of mental health, especially psychiatry, would say that, well, when you lose interest in something you used to enjoy, including and especially sex, it is a sign of a mental illness. But rather, it is the sign of raised awareness, higher levels of consciousness. For the same reason that it is despicable to have sex with a lesser form of life, such as a dog, a cat, a donkey, a goat, what have you. It is despicable to have sex with an adult female or anything else when you reach the higher levels of consciousness. For this reason, monks isolate themselves either as a result of reaching this level of awareness and seeking to refine their spirit and their spiritual awareness, or out of a desire to achieve a higher spiritual state. You see, the problem here you see as a recurring theme with religion. You see it in primitive cultures, pagan cultures. These kind of religious men separating themselves from the normal social activities associated with their society, including marriage and sex and fornication. You see it as a recurring theme in religion and spirituality. Purity. You see, even the occult that indulges in satanic forms of bestiality has also, on the other side, the idea of virginity being relevant, sacrificing virgins, not wasting your sexual energy, and so on and so forth. It's a recurring theme, really, in religion and spirituality. Man's understanding of these things. Because there is something to it, really. Now, women having all the traits that I talk about, selfishness, shallowness, materialism, cowardice, conformity, evilness, lies, and more, are lesser forms of life. That's the general rule. It's really nearly impossible to find the exception to this rule. Well, I know I've looked for many, many years. And with all due respect, I've never met a female I consider worthy. But I have met some that I consider closer than others. But it goes back to number 2, never settle. But if you're going to settle, make sure she's a 9 or a 10, right? But really, when I truly follow that train of thought to its finish, I don't settle at all, now do I? Which leads me back to my oath in the first place. Number 4, keep the last oath of no sex, no romantic relationships, and more. So the settling that I would have done if I decided to would really be flirting and dates and insignificant things. You can pet the dog, but don't have sex with it. You can play catch with the dog, give it a bone, but don't have sex with it. The same thing can be said about adult females. They fall generally in 2 categories. Desperate or gold-digging conformists. There are varying degrees of both. Some are extremely desperate. Some are extremely materialistic. Some try to save face and downplay their materialism, their lust for self-indulgence and self-indulgent activities. Yeah, it is rather loathsome what they do. Very loathsome practices. Going back to martial arts, it's just like with sparring. The superior technique and the superior application combined will win. Sparring says everything about technique. It says everything about the transferable skills, including technical skills that are needed for victory. In the same way, sparring with women, if you will, intellectually, socially, shows the transferable skills, the spiritual skills, if you will, needed to achieve a higher state of existence. Will you let their conformist nature contaminate your soul? Or will you push them away? Let's face it, there are sensual desires, carnal passions. and they get in the way. Even Masons acknowledge this. Then they turn around and let their sensual desires lead them to a life of attempting to subjugate other men and gaining riches and what have you. You must understand the world. You must understand women. I think that if a pimp was given enough time, he would become a holy man. As his understanding of women increased, he'd realize what they're doing to him, making him a sexually immoral, materialistic fool. If that pimp would study spirituality and Christianity in its pure form, he would almost certainly be forced to the conclusion that I have come to long ago. That there are more fruitful and worthwhile pursuits. What is the pursuit of happiness versus the pursuit of pleasure? Materialistic, hedonistic pursuits versus higher ones. When you ask the right questions and you pursue the answer in the right way, you get the right answer to the most pertinent and relevant questions. History is not only written by the winners, but so is the present and the future. That is the problem here. The winners have always been satanic eugenicists for at least 500 years, and almost certainly more. I've thoroughly analyzed and identified the problems. I've given you the solutions, individual solutions, sociological and bigger solutions for the bigger picture, societal solutions to societal ills, or societal ills. You see, you must be harsh with women. But I do disagree with the mgtow about what precisely should be done about it. I think that everything should be designed to bring women back to the table, as very few mgtows have pointed out. You have to force them to correct themselves. Women are like a child that you have kicked out and said, get your life together before you come back. Prove to me that you are worthy before you come back. So women collectively have rebelled against all that is right and true. They need to be pushed away until they get their act together. And you need to highlight in a very effective manner why they are wrong. Because during the phase of rejection and isolation, really, at least isolating them from good men, there will be bad women and bad people who try to take advantage. And you need to highlight continually why they are wrong, and effectively. All the spiritual bottom feeders, no doubt, will try to take advantage and use this to take control of reproduction. So it is of the utmost importance that you make it clear to them why they are wrong. So, as women learn their lessons, so to speak, many will return. But first, it will be the desperate women. And they need to be taught a lesson as well. Because just like you have two categories of women, gold-digging materialistic women who are the most reluctant to change, you have your very desperate women who are very ambitious when it comes to mating, if you will. And they will almost certainly say, well, I'm willing to do this. Really, they're conformists too, but in a different way. They're willing to conform to the expectations of the non-conformist elements of society, specifically male in this case. While the gold diggers will continue to conform to the mainstream satanic norms. Satanic by definition, not by theory, but really when you describe Satanism, the mainstream norms are satanic. So that is a fair and scientific term to use. They do it as scientific Satanists. They're studying Satanism as a scientific and philosophical idea. And so the term applies perfectly. It is only in the eyes and the minds of lesser men and lesser minds that word seems absurd or outrageous. So, as the birth pains of the beginning of a new society come into being, society will shift. It's already doing so to a certain extent. And this is that they follow the blueprint that I'm laying out. Some good women, having been put at odds with the desperate women, because some men will settle. Some men will break down and settle for the desperate women in the midst of all this chaos. So there will be a small fraction of desperate women, as there is now, really, that are willing, to conform to the nonconformist elements. But there will also be women who are attractive who pretend. They will pretend to conform in an attempt to control the nonconformist element of society and to keep an eye on them, to keep tabs on them, and to place informants in positions where they can effectively gather information and influence the movement. At the end of the day, the most insightful of men who have the highest level of consciousness, which is really what insight is, is a higher level of consciousness. So when I say, look, you didn't understand the different forms of intelligence because you're a motherfucking fool, talking to the oppressors, two groups in specific. You can explore who they are in the comments. I was really and mainly, primarily talking about insight and higher levels of consciousness, spiritual insight, divine insight, the most important types of insight. So these people may be able to accumulate wealth and convince other people that they're smart and deserving. They may be book smart. But do they have insight? No. They just have an ability, in some cases even an uncanny ability, to perform well in the white man's academic system. Or really, that means nothing. Just like an IQ test really means nothing. It really has to do with, we'll call it conformist intelligence. The ability for the mind and the brain to work together to succeed in an academic system that demands conformity to excel in said system. So as the birth pains continue, we will see a natural shift from the intellectual class, if you will, or the recognized performers, according to the system standards, the prestigious colleges and sissies like that. And as society is forced to accept their failure, they will inevitably turn to the true experts, the people who truly know what's best for humanity. Figuratively speaking, they will come on their knees and say, yes, you guys were right the whole time. Tell us what to do. Figuratively. But really, what they will do is they will steal the ideas of the smartest minds, and they will present them, repackage them, and present them as their own, with their own twist that allows them to maintain their stranglehold on society. But in reality, what's going on is they're going on their knees and saying, please help us. Please tell us what to do. We were too clever by half. You guys were right. And unfortunately, this will not lead to the righteous given their rightful place in society, but rather it will lead to the righteous philosophies returning to mainstream society. Kind of like the world comes around, as they say. What goes around comes around. The world comes around. Oh, he'll come around. They'll come around. Yes, indeed. They'll come around. But not after decades, if not hundreds of years, including the years we've had already, of darkness and suffering at the hands of these morons who are too clever by half, these book-smart ninnies that have proven themselves time and time again to be utterly incompetent, useless, and pitiful. These cheaters, these covert druggers, these cowards. As eugenics gets applied, many of the righteous bloodlines will die off. But nevertheless, figuratively speaking, they will come on their knees begging in the form of stealing. Because you have to really look at this from a spiritual perspective, figuratively and spiritually speaking. Their souls, having been fully immersed in darkness and Satanism and greed, will then come begging to the light. Please shed some light on us. Enlighten us. And while they are stealing in the material world, they are begging in the spiritual world, like the sniveling cowards they are. Not smart enough to see it that way, never willing to admit, but begging evermore. And nonetheless, these beggars, these spiritual beggars, are like dogs, begging for a bone, begging for a toy. Having to rewrite history yet again and pretend that this is part of the Mason's grand plan or something. They will teach their kids what I have been teaching society for quite some time. The world will be on its way out. It will almost certainly be too late. But nevertheless, these liars, these cowards, they will say, look, what created this dreadful situation was our satanic philosophies. And now we have to discard them. They no longer serve us. You see, and that's part of moral relativism. Now that the time calls for true morality, because they have no other fucking choice, they will go back and listen to what people like me have been saying. And then what will they do? They will take on the philosophies. These half-wits, these morons. There's so many ways I could explain it to you. How much they would have wasted, how much time would have been lost, will have been lost because of their stupidity and their self-deluded mind state. So many good men excluded, their DNA rejected by satanic dogs and their Babylonian harlots. What is left of the world then? They will look back, hearken. They will remember a time when a man who was much greater than them said, "This is what's best for society." And they will feel almost as stupid as they really are. But not quite, because remember, these are self-deluded cowards. Women, being the lesser sex bitches, will be forced to go back to their place, having seen their total failure. They will say, look, if we were smart, we wouldn't have teamed up and had sex with these idiots in the first place. It's very sad. It's like a man who's driving off a cliff. Why someone like me was on the side of the road saying, there's a cliff up ahead, there's a cliff up ahead. But they were so greedy. They were too busy getting head from a pigeon and counting their gold to pay the person who was like me any mind. And they drove off the cliff. And on the way down, they're saying, I shouldn't have been so fucking greedy. The pigeon said, I shouldn't have been sucking your New World Order dick. Maybe I could have snapped out of it and listened to the voice of reason. And they will die together a miserable, depraved death. They will be put in their place eventually, like the rich, shallow cowards they are. They will be put in the lake of fire. This is how it is. Sad, I know. It's tragic. There is no victory in the sense that everyone is, celebrating, saying, oh, we beat these people. There's only eugenics and then the scum that are left over, no longer able to hear any voices of reason because they screened them out. No one on the side of the road to warn them anymore. They will drive off that cliff. And that is how humanity ends. Right before they drive off, they will attempt to slam the brakes and grab the pigeon by her hair and pull her off their dick, throw their money to the side, and try to save themselves. But they won't be able to do. They will die. Spiritually, especially, they will die. If only women had sense. If only rich people weren't so greedy. If only they had given me my rightful credit so I could end this madness once and for all. If only the spiritual bottom feeders' complexes and desire for social acceptance hadn't blinded their already mostly blinded selves. All this could have been prevented. But now what's left of humanity will attempt to listen to me when it is too late, and they will die.